He kept her in the shadows for 6 years, loving a ghost while she waited to be seen. When his ex came back, he didn't hesitate, he left. Even after the ex had her hurt. But she didn't beg. She vanished. And when he finally chased her down, it was at her wedding. To another man. It started with rain. Not a soft romantic drizzle, the kind that leaves patterns on cafe windows, but the kind of rain that soaks you through in seconds. The sky had opened up suddenly over Manhattan, and I was caught in it, lugging 2 bouquets meant for the Monroe Foundation's gala through traffic and puddles. My heels slipped twice. My hair had turned into a dripping mess. I was already 15 minutes late for the ballroom setup. That's when I met him. Ethan Monroe. He didn't arrive with the fanfare you'd expect from a man whose last name was engraved on buildings. No entourage. No photographers. Just him stepping out of a black car and into the rain like it didn't matter. He held a massive umbrella, one hand tucked casually in his coat pocket. He saw me struggling. Without hesitation, he walked over and tilted his umbrella above me. "You look like you lost a fight with a thundercloud," he said, that unmistakable Monroe charm already wrapped in his voice. I was soaked, cold, and humiliated. But I managed to smile. "You should see the other girl." He chuckled and handed me his monogrammed handkerchief. With the initials M stitched in gold. Thanked him. He looked at me a second longer, then said, "Claire, right? I saw you at the charity event last month. You handled that donor meltdown like a pro." He remembered my name. I wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by someone like Ethan Monroe. Before I could say much else, he was gone, disappearing through the hotel doors. I stood there, rain pounding around me, hand clutching the handkerchief like a relic. Later that night, after the event chaos, I pulled out my phone and saw a message from an unknown number. "Hope the rain hasn't drowned your spirit. Let me take you somewhere drier next time." I stared at it for a full minute, then replied, "Only if you bring the umbrella again." That was how it started. No fireworks. No grand declarations. Just a stranger who saw me when I didn't expect to be seen. Our first real meeting was a cafe tucked between a record store and a dry cleaner on Sullivan Street. It wasn't glamorous, and I half expected him to cancel last minute. He didn't. He arrived before me, no bodyguard, no driver. Just Ethan, dressed casually in a dark sweater and jeans, blending into the crowd like someone who didn't carry half the city's expectations on his shoulders. He smiled when he saw me, and I swear it reached his eyes. We talked about books, movies, New York. He didn't mention his company. I didn't ask. It felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other longer than we had. That night he texted, "You made me forget I'm Ethan Monroe. Thank you." It was addictive, the way he made me feel, like I was the only thing not scripted in his world. What began as weekly coffees turned into late-night drives, quiet dinners, stolen weekends. But there were always limits. Boundaries I could feel but never name. He didn't like public places with cameras. He never posted photos. He wouldn't even hold my hand if anyone we knew might see. "I just like having something for myself," he'd say. Something real. And I believed him. Because in private he was generous. Kind of warm. He remembered the way I took my tea, sent me flowers for no reason, listened when I ranted about clients or cried over my mother's health scares. He was present. But only behind closed doors. We weren't official. There were no Instagram posts, no couple photos on the mantle. At first I didn't mind. But as the months turned into years, I started to wonder who exactly I was to him. Girlfriend? Secret? Therapy? I told myself we had our own rhythm. That this quiet intimacy was enough. But looking back now, I realize I was being slowly edited into someone else's story. A story that had already been written, and I was just filling in the gaps. It started with small things. He didn't like me in red. I thought it was just a preference until I remembered the photos I'd once seen. Her in that same hue, wrapped in a crimson dress with his arm around her waist. I had found them accidentally, tucked away in an old fashion article. Lila Reynolds, the muse, the face of Monroe's golden years. The woman who vanished. The woman he never mentioned. One night, early in our relationship, I'd asked casually, "What happened to Lila?" He froze, wine glass halfway to his lips. "She left." That was all he said. No explanation. No bitterness. Just a void sealed with silence. So I stopped asking. Instead I started adjusting. No red. No roses. He hated them, too cliché, he said, but I knew better. They were her favorite. I wore soft pinks and neutrals. I stopped humming French songs. Once he flinched when I sang La Vie en Rose while folding laundry. Said it gave him a headache. He didn't mean to turn me into her shadow. But he didn't stop me either. By the second year I knew exactly who I was. Not his girlfriend. Not his partner. I was her placeholder. The quiet version. The safer one. And I tried to believe that maybe I could be enough. Maybe in time he'd let her go. So I stayed. Through the birthdays he forgot. The anniversaries he brushed aside. The moments when I caught him staring out the window, eyes glassy with something that looked a lot like grief. I thought if I was patient I'd win. Because that's what love was, right? Enduring. Waiting. Choosing someone even when they didn't choose you every day. But there's a difference between loving someone and waiting for them to love you back. And I didn't know that yet. The worst part, he made me feel lucky. Like I'd been chosen from a crowd. Like being the woman he trusted with his silence was an honor. But love shouldn't feel like a privilege. It should feel like a home. And with Ethan I always felt like a guest. Tiptoeing. Careful not to wake the memories that lived in every corner of his life. Especially the one with red lips and vanished promises. I wasn't expecting to see her name again. It was a slow Saturday. Ethan had left early for a meeting. He was vague about where, but I didn't ask. I'd stopped asking. I made myself tea, sat at the kitchen counter and scrolled aimlessly through the news like I always did. And then I saw it. Lila Reynolds returns to New York after 6 years abroad. My heart stopped. There she was on the front page of a lifestyle section, stepping off a plane at JFK in oversized sunglasses and a sleek black coat looking flawless. Untouchable. The article described her return as a triumphant comeback. Fashion's lost princess, back to reclaim her crown. Rumors swirled of new business ventures, private showings and an upcoming collaboration with, of course, Monroe Industries. They didn't even try to hide it. Sources close to the family confirm that Lila and Ethan Monroe have reconnected professionally, and perhaps personally. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't just a name anymore. It wasn't just a memory. She was here. Ethan didn't mention the article that night. He walked through the door like nothing had changed, kissed me on the cheek, poured himself a drink and sat on the couch with his phone in hand. I waited. Waited for a word. A hint. A confession. Nothing. So I asked, "Did you see the news?" He looked up, cool as ever. "What news?" "Lila's back." Pause. Then he said, "I heard." And that was it. He didn't explain how long he'd known. Didn't say whether he'd seen her. Didn't look guilty or surprised. He just returned to his phone like the conversation had ended. I stood in the kitchen holding my mug like it could anchor me to something solid. It couldn't. Because everything I had feared for 6 years had just come true. The next few days were unbearable. He was quieter than usual. Distant. Phone always face down, calls taken behind closed doors. Dinners missed with weak excuses. Once I walked into the study and found him laughing on the phone. He never laughed like that with me anymore. When he saw me, his face fell. He ended the call quickly. "She needed advice about a launch," he said. But he didn't say her name. He didn't need to. That night, I lay awake while he slept beside me. The silence between us had grown into a canyon. And in the dark, I realized I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I was afraid I already had. 3 days after the headline, Ethan invited me to a foundation dinner. It felt out of character. We hadn't gone to a public event together in over a year. When I asked why, he shrugged. I thought it'd be good for us to get out. I didn't argue. But I felt the shift deep and sour in my gut. Something wasn't right. Still I dressed for it. A navy dress, tasteful and safe. No red. I hadn't worn red in years. I curled my hair softly and wore the earrings he once said he liked. Gold hoops, simple. When he picked me up, he barely looked at me. "You ready?" he asked. "Not you look beautiful." Just ready. The event was hosted at a luxury hotel in Midtown. Chandeliers glowed overhead, and the room was full of people I'd only ever seen on magazine covers or behind podiums at company events. Everyone greeted Ethan with warm smiles and practiced familiarity. No one knew who I was. To them, I was an accessory, another nameless woman on his arm. At our table, people chatted easily. Wine flowed. Conversations buzzed. Ethan slid into charm mode, his corporate smile plastered on like armor. I tried to play along. Until someone brought her up. A man in his 60s leaned toward our end of the table, swirling his wine. So, he said with a knowing smirk, rumor has it the queen is back. Lila? Another woman asked, perking up. Ethan didn't flinch. She's always had timing, someone else said. Maybe this time she'll stay. Then came the toast. To second chances, someone laughed. Especially the ones we never saw coming. Everyone chuckled, raised their glasses. Except me. I sat frozen, my stomach churning, glass untouched in front of me. Ethan didn't speak. Didn't correct them. Didn't say a word to make me feel like I belonged. In the car ride home I didn't say anything. I stared out the window, watching the lights blur as we crossed the bridge. He broke the silence first. What's wrong? I laughed, dry and tired. Really? He didn't respond. Just stared ahead, jaw tight. I turned to him. Do you still love her? The question hung between us, sharp and naked. He didn't answer right away. Then finally, I don't know. I looked away, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. That was worse than a yes. He slept in the guest room that night. And I sat alone in the bedroom, still wearing the earrings he said he liked. But I didn't feel beautiful. I felt small. Like I'd spent 6 years building a home in someone else's empty shell. And now the past had walked back in, and was moving furniture. I needed air. After the dinner, after his answer, I don't know, I couldn't keep pretending. The walls of our apartment felt like they were closing in, filled with memories I wasn't sure were ever truly mine. So I did what I hadn't done in weeks. I left. Not to run errands. Not to impress him. Not to wait on him. To be. I wore jeans, a loose sweater, tied my hair back and wandered. Down sidewalks I used to love. Into a bookstore that smelled like old stories. Past coffee shops that once reminded me of laughter. I picked up a cinnamon roll from a corner bakery, something sweet to cut through the bitterness. For a moment I felt like myself again. Unseen. Undemanded. Free. I took the quieter route home, an alley between a florist and a closed cafe. It was early afternoon and there were a few people walking ahead of me. I wasn't scared. Until I heard the footsteps behind me. Quick. Intentional. Too close. I glanced over my shoulder. A man in a hoodie. Head down. Hands in his pockets. I turned onto the next block, picked up my pace. So did he. Before I could react, he shoved me. Hard. I slammed into the wall, shoulder first. My wrist caught the edge of a trash bin. The bakery bag dropped, the cinnamon roll flattened beneath my boot. But he didn't take my purse. He didn't demand anything. He just stared at me for a moment. Then ran. I sat on the curb, dazed. My wrist ached. My shoulder burned. A woman ran over, asking if I was okay, if I needed the police. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. At the hospital they told me I had a hairline fracture in my wrist. Lucky it wasn't worse, the doctor said. Lucky. That word echoed in my head. I called Ethan from the hospital lobby. Straight to voicemail. I texted him, I'm okay. Something happened. Call me. He didn't. Not that night. Not the next day. A week passed. And then the doorman told me something odd. A woman came asking for you, he said. Tall. Expensive coat. Sunglasses. Said she was a friend. Didn't leave her name. I didn't need it. I knew. It wasn't a mugging. It was a message. And though I had no proof, no recording, no fingerprint, in my gut I knew exactly who sent it. Lila. And the worst part? He knew. He had to. Because when I sent him another message, this one just 4 words, he finally replied. Please don't make this harder. Make what harder? Losing me? Or going back to her? She showed up on a Tuesday. I'd been home from work barely 10 minutes when the intercom buzzed. I didn't recognize the voice at first. It was calm, elegant, low. It's Lila. We need to talk. Every bone in my body locked up. For a moment I thought I was imagining things. A prank. A cruel trick of exhaustion. But when I looked out the window I saw her. Standing at the entrance of my building, arms crossed over a designer trench coat, oversized sunglasses perched in her hair. I should have ignored her. Should have let security turn her away. But I didn't. I buzzed her in. She walked into my apartment like she owned the air in the room. She didn't ask to sit down. She just did. I stayed standing. She looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You're prettier than I expected. I didn't answer. She exhaled, running a hand through her perfectly tousled waves. I didn't come here to fight. I still didn't speak. I came here to tell you the truth. Because he won't. For a second I almost laughed. Now she wanted to be honest? She continued. I came back because I wanted closure, she said. I thought I could see him, say goodbye to that part of my life and move on. I raised a brow. That's not what happened. No, she admitted. It's not. There was a pause. I saw how he looked at you. It rattled me. I stayed silent. So I tested him. I reminded him of who I used to be to him. The things we had. The places. The history. Another pause. And he came back. Those 3 words cut deeper than anything I'd read in the news. Then she said something I'll never forget. I thought I was winning. But he doesn't really love me either. I blinked. What? She laughed softly. Bitterly. He loves who I used to be. Just like he loves what you could be. You're not a person to him, Claire. You're a chapter. A scene he rewrites when the ending doesn't go his way. The silence between us thickened. Then she added, quieter now. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. My body tensed. You mean physically? Her jaw clenched. I didn't tell him to do it. But I knew someone would send a message. Ethan didn't stop it. Neither did I. So it was true. All of it. She stood up then, adjusting her coat. For what it's worth, she said, pausing at the door, I envy you. You were able to love him for who he is now. I never could. And just like that she was gone. But her words stayed. Burning like a match pressed into paper. After Lila left, I sat motionless on the couch for over an hour. Her perfume still lingered in the air. Jasmine and some expensive floral I couldn't name. It filled the room like smoke, curling around the truth she'd dropped so casually, like it was just another line in a script she'd recited too many times. You're a chapter. A scene he rewrites when the ending doesn't go his way. The words kept echoing. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked through the apartment room by room, touching everything I used to think meant something. The photo on the hallway table, Ethan and I at a vineyard 2 summers ago. I remember that weekend. He'd smiled the whole time, held my hand like it meant forever. Now I wondered who he was holding on to in his mind. Me. Or her. By the end of the week he was gone. It wasn't some dramatic exit. No slammed doors, no suitcases packed in haste. Just gradual disappearance. A shirt missing from the closet. Then his watch. Then the drawer in the bathroom. Empty. And one morning I walked in and found the apartment too quiet. Too clean. No scent of his cologne, no tie draped over the chair. And on the counter? A key. Nothing else. Not even a note. I called him once. He didn't answer. I sent a message. At least tell me this is really over. He read it. Didn't reply. That was my answer. The following days moved in slow motion. I went to work, answered emails, smiled when I had to. I told no one. Not my friends, not my coworkers. Not even my therapist. Because how do you explain losing someone you never really had? 6 years. 6 years of being almost enough. And he disappeared like none of it mattered. It took me days to admit it aloud. He chose her. He chose her even after she admitted to standing by while someone hurt me. After she made it clear he didn't love her anymore either. After she confessed to manipulating him, manipulating us. He still chose her. Because comfort is louder than clarity. Because the past is easier than facing the damage of the present. Because I had always been a stand-in. Never the one. Just the space he rested in between what he lost and what he couldn't let go of. I sat on the bedroom floor with the sapphire bracelet I once found in his drawer. Hers. I kept it in a box out of spite, maybe hope. Now I dropped it down the garbage chute without a second thought. It didn't even make a sound. And still, no calls. No messages. No regrets. He vanished. And I let him. Because for once I wasn't going to chase someone who never stopped running. Grief doesn't always look like sobbing on the floor. Sometimes it's quiet. Sterile. Methodical. I started folding laundry at 2 a.m. the night after Ethan left. Not because there was a mess, but because it was the only thing I could control. I stacked towels. Color-coded shirts. Scrubbed a counter that was already clean. My body moved like it remembered how to survive even if my heart had forgotten. Because when someone leaves without a goodbye, you don't grieve the person. You grieve the silence. I stopped eating properly. Not because I wanted to starve. I just forgot. I'd boil water and leave the stove on. Pour coffee and never drink it. I went to bed in the same clothes I wore during the day, and sometimes I didn't bother with bed at all. I told no one. There was no dramatic post online, no phone call to my best friend, no tearful confession at work. I showed up each day with eyeliner, a pressed blazer, and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. That was the trick. If you look like you're fine, no one asks questions. And I didn't want to answer them. I thought about texting him once. Just one line, "Did I ever matter?" But I didn't send it. Because I already knew the answer. Then came the dream. We were in Italy, the Amalfi Coast, somewhere we once said we'd visit. Ethan was laughing, holding my hand. The sun was golden. Everything felt soft. Then I blinked and he let go. Lila stood beside him in a red dress. She didn't speak. He didn't have to. He turned away and I watched them walk into the light. I woke up in tears. I couldn't stop. That was the only night I cried for him. A week later I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a hotel receipt. His name. Her name. Same suite. 3 nights. Dated the same week I was in the hospital with a fractured wrist. That's when my heartbreak ended. Because pain becomes something else when it hardens. It becomes resolve. The next morning I called my Aunt Marianne in Boston. She didn't ask why. Just said, "Get on the next train. I'll pick you up." I packed 1 suitcase. Left the key to the apartment on the kitchen counter just like he had. And walked out the door for the last time. Not with tears. Not with revenge in my heart. Just peace. The kind that comes when you finally realize you were never the problem. You were just the placeholder in someone else's unfinished story. Boston was quiet in a way New York never was. The air felt heavier, the mornings slower. Aunt Marianne lived in a charming brownstone in Beacon Hill, with ivy climbing the brick walls and a cat named Percival who hated everyone except her. She let me take the guest room without questions. No prodding. No pity. She just brewed tea and slid a stack of books across the table. "You'll know when you're ready," she said. And somehow I believed her. I spent the first week in Boston doing nothing important. I walked. Slept. Read pages and pages without remembering the words. I visited a local museum, sat in cafes just to watch strangers pass by. No one knew me there. No one looked at me like they were waiting for me to explain what went wrong. That anonymity was healing. For the first time in years I wasn't someone's secret. I was just clear. I met Julian by accident. It was a Wednesday. I'd taken the wrong train to Cambridge and ended up 2 stops past where I was supposed to be. My phone had died. I ducked into a small clinic just to ask for directions and charge my phone at the reception desk. He walked out of the back room wearing scrubs and a tired smile. "You don't look like a patient," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "Just lost." He chuckled and handed me a phone charger. "Well, that makes 2 of us." We talked for a few minutes. Then a few more. He walked me to the station and offered to buy me coffee while we waited. I said yes. I didn't even think about it. And for the first time in a long time I laughed. Really laughed. Julian Hale wasn't flashy. He didn't own skyscrapers or make headlines. He was a pediatric trauma surgeon with hands that held broken things and a heart that didn't try to fix people who didn't ask to be saved. He didn't Google me. He didn't ask about Ethan. He asked what book I was reading. What music I liked. Whether I preferred sunsets or thunderstorms. It was simple. And it was enough. We met for lunch a few days later. Then dinner. Then long walks along the river where I told him pieces of my story, slowly, carefully. He never looked away. Never judged. Just listened. There was no rush with Julian. No secrets. No shadows. Just 2 people learning to breathe again. Together. Loving Julian didn't happen all at once. Came in pieces. Quiet, ordinary, everyday things. Not with grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but in the pauses between conversations. In the way he brewed tea exactly how I liked it without asking twice. In the way he'd hand me his scarf when the wind got too sharp, even if he was shivering too. With Ethan I had been a secret tucked into shadows. With Julian I was part of the light. There were no rules. No lists of don'ts. No invisible boundaries defined by another woman's ghost. I could wear red if I wanted. I could hum French songs and he'd hum along, off-key without flinching. The first time he reached for my hand in public, I froze. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't used to being chosen in daylight. He noticed. "Is this okay?" I nodded, throat tight. "More than okay." He smiled and held my hand tighter. We talked about everything: his late wife, my life in New York, the ugly in-betweens. He told me about the night he lost a 6-year-old girl in surgery. How he'd driven for hours with the windows down, unsure if he could keep doing this work. "I don't think healing people ever gets easier," he said. "You just learn how to carry the weight." I told him I'd been someone's second choice for 6 years. "That wasn't love," he replied gently. "That was limbo." And maybe he was right. Because whatever this was between us, it felt nothing like limbo. Felt like land. Like home. One evening we sat on his living room floor, sharing takeout from cardboard boxes, feet tangled, our conversation dancing between jokes and truths. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "I don't want perfect," he said. "I just want real." I leaned into his palm and whispered, "Then you have me." And I meant it. Every word. Julian didn't just fall in love with me. He saw me. Not for what I had been to someone else, but for who I was, flawed, soft, learning to begin again. And in loving him I learned something too. Love doesn't have to be loud to be life-changing. Sometimes it's just steady. Present. Safe. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. We were sitting on the porch of Julian's townhouse, our mugs warm in hand, legs stretched out beneath a patchwork blanket. The city was just beginning to stir. Bird song, distant footsteps, the gentle hum of a neighbor's wind chime. Julian looked over at me, eyes soft, and said, "Marry me." No kneeling. No ring hidden in a dessert or elaborate setup. Just those 2 words, spoken like he was asking if I wanted to keep building this life with him. I stared at him, stunned, but not because I didn't want to say yes. I just never thought love could feel like this. "Hey," I said. And it was enough. We didn't rush the announcement. For weeks, only Aunt Marianne knew. Julian's friends noticed the glint on my finger, and we shared smiles and toasts in quiet corners. It was peaceful, intimate. Nothing like the way Ethan had once made grand gestures only to hide me behind curtains. Julian wanted me front and center. So when he posted a simple photo, our hands intertwined on a cafe table, my ring catching the light, I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I smiled. But the past has sharp ears. Within hours, the post had traveled farther than we expected. Someone tagged Ethan in a comment. And just like that, the first message arrived. "Congratulations. I didn't expect to see your name again." No signature. But I didn't need one. It was from him. I ignored it. But then came more. Emails. Texts. A call from a number I hadn't saved but never forgot. I let it ring out. Then a voicemail. His voice, careful, too measured. "Claire. I saw the post. Hey, can we talk?" It was surreal how fast he returned. Not to my life, but to trying to be in it. As if one picture shattered the illusion he had built, and now he was scrambling to catch a train he himself had abandoned. Julian noticed the tension in my shoulders before I told him anything. "You okay?" he asked one night as I stood at the sink longer than necessary. I hesitated, then nodded. "Ethan knows." Julian didn't ask if I was going to respond. He didn't tell me what to do. He just said, "Whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere." And that was the difference. Ethan needed to win. Julian chose to stay. I agreed to meet him. Not because I missed him. Not because I wanted closure. But because something in me needed to see it. His face, his eyes, the weight of his choices. After all this time, I didn't want words on a screen or voicemails playing pretend. I wanted the truth face to face. We chose a cafe in the city, neutral ground, public safe. I wore a soft gray coat, nothing dramatic. Just clean lines, calm colors, steady hands. He was already there when I arrived. Suit pressed. Tie forgotten. Eyes tired. Not the man who left me. Not the one who loved her either. Just a hollow version of both. "Claire," he said, standing up like we were old friends meeting for coffee, not fractured memories bound by silence. I sat without speaking. He didn't waste time. "I made the worst mistake of my life," he said. I stayed quiet. I thought when she came back it meant something. I thought I had to finish what we started. Still quiet. She left again, 2 weeks ago. Said she couldn't do it. Said I wasn't the same man. And she was right. I looked down at my hands. The engagement ring Julian had chosen caught the sunlight and scattered it across the table. Ethan followed my gaze. I saw the photo, he said quietly. He looks at you the way I should have. I flinched. Not from pain, but from the relief of hearing what I already knew. Why now? Finally asked. He swallowed. Because I realized what I had when it was already gone. I shook my head slowly. No. You realized I was real when someone else saw me in the light. That hit him. His mouth opened then closed again. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. He looked like he might cry. I didn't. I'm marrying him, I said simply. Not for drama. Not to twist the knife. Just truth. I know, Ethan whispered. I just had to try. I nodded. And then I stood. There were no final words. No long embrace. No reaching across the table. He stayed seated as I walked away. Just like I had stayed for 6 years while he drifted further and further out of reach. Now it was his turn to sit in the silence. And mine to walk toward something real. The thing about planning a wedding with someone who loves you, it doesn't feel like a performance. Feels like a conversation. Julian didn't care about the venue being featured in a magazine or the flowers matching anyone's aesthetic. He cared that I felt joy. That we chose things together. That every detail reflected us. Not a legacy, not a brand. The ceremony would be held in a vineyard just outside the city, surrounded by rolling hills and the soft hum of wind through old trees. Not a skyscraper in sight. My dress was simple, ivory silk with a fitted bodice and no frills. I didn't want layers to hide beneath. I wanted to walk down the aisle as myself. Honest. Whole. Free. We sent out invitations slowly. Just family, close friends, and a handful of colleagues. Aunt Marianne cried when hers arrived, then immediately began planning a toast, even though we'd asked her not to. Julian laughed. She's earned it. We met with the band, picked out songs that reminded us of Sunday mornings and long drives. I watched him taste cake samples with childlike wonder, saying things like, "Why do all wedding cakes taste like hope?" For the first time in my life, I wasn't managing someone else's expectations. I was building something real, with someone who showed up for me every day. And still I could feel it. A shadow trying to crawl back in. Ethan didn't reach out again. But mutual friends whispered about him. How he was spiraling. That Lila had left for Europe. That Monroe Industries was barely holding its reputation together after an investor scandal. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. Not because I didn't care. But because it wasn't mine to carry anymore. The week before the wedding, I stood alone in the vineyard at dusk, watching the staff string fairy lights along the path I'd soon walk down. 6 years ago I had imagined a different aisle. A different man. But that woman, the one who waited for scraps, she didn't exist anymore. Now there was just me, Claire, and the man who loved me without conditions. When Julian found me there, I turned to him with glassy eyes. "Nervous?" he asked, brushing hair from my face. I shook my head. "Grateful." He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Me too." We stood there together as the lights flickered on, gentle, warm, glowing. No cameras. No headlines. No ghosts. Just us. And tomorrow we'd say yes to forever. Without fear. Without silence. Without secrets. The morning of the wedding was quiet. No chaos. No missing shoes or forgotten vows. Just sunlight pouring through gauzy curtains and the gentle clink of teacups as Aunt Marianne hummed while arranging flowers on the porch. I woke early not out of nerves but because something inside me wanted to soak in every second. I sat by the window in my robe, barefoot, sipping tea, watching as the vineyard came to life. Chairs being set, white petals scattered, music being tested on soft speakers. Julian was staying in a separate cottage with his best man. He'd sent a note through a staff member. "In every version of my life I'd find you. See you soon. Jay." I pressed the card to my chest and smiled. Guests began arriving around noon. Old college friends. Julian's colleagues from the hospital. Distant relatives. Even a few friends of mine from New York. People who remembered me before Ethan, who saw the flicker return to my eyes once I left. Everyone was seated by the time the music began to swell. My heart was steady. For the first time I was walking towards someone who would never ask me to be smaller, quieter, less visible. There were no ghosts trailing behind me. Only light. I stepped onto the stone path, bouquet in hand, veil fluttering with each step. And then, chaos. The doors at the back of the vineyard slammed open. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw him. Thin. Disheveled. Out of breath. Tie loose around his neck. A storm in a suit. He moved through the crowd like a man possessed, shouting my name. Claire. Wait, don't do this. The music halted. Julian didn't move from the altar. He just stood there calm. Waiting. I paused halfway down the aisle. Our guests watched in frozen silence as Ethan stumbled forward, eyes locked on mine. I made a mistake, he said. Please. Don't marry him. Don't throw us away. The word hit like a brick. There was no us. Not anymore. I took a breath. Then walked forward. Step by step, past the man who once left me for a ghost. Past the man who only wanted me back once someone else chose me. Ethan reached out just a little. But I didn't stop. I reached the altar, turned to Julian and placed my hand in his. I do, I said. Purry. Loudly. Without a single crack in my voice. Security ushered Ethan away gently. He didn't fight. He just stood in the back, frozen, eyes glazed over with disbelief. He had finally come to chase me. But I had already arrived at the place I was always meant to be. The rest of the ceremony was a blur of golden light and soft tears. I barely remember the officiant's voice, only the warmth in Julian's hand as he held mine, steady as ever. Only the way the breeze danced through the vineyard, carrying away the last remnants of everything that came before. And just like that, after all the silence, all the years of standing in someone else's shadow, I became someone's wife. Not someone's secret. Not someone's mistake. Someone's choice. At the reception, laughter replaced whispers. Aunt Marianne cried through her toast, then tried to cover it up with humor and a terrible joke about hospital gowns. Julian kissed my shoulder during dinner, held my hand under the table, whispered that I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The guests danced under fairy lights, the band played all the songs we loved, and no one talked about Ethan. Except once. A friend from New York approached me quietly, holding a champagne flute. Was he really here? I nodded. She didn't ask anything else. Didn't need to. Because that was the past. And we were already living the after. Later that evening, Julian pulled me into the center of the dance floor. We moved slowly, rhythmically, as though the world outside had disappeared. I didn't think I could ever be this happy, I told him. He leaned in and whispered, "That's because you didn't have someone who knew how to hold you." Across the vineyard I saw Ethan just once more. At the edge of the property, beyond the string lights, in the shadows near the tree line. He didn't try to come closer this time. He just watched. Maybe waiting for a sign. Maybe just realizing the finality of it all. I didn't wave. I didn't run. I just let the silence finish what it had started years ago. Julian spun me gently beneath the lights, and in that moment I knew something for certain. Healing doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes, it arrives in a moment where you stop looking backward entirely, and realize the peace you were chasing was never with them. It was always waiting in the arms of someone else. 3 months passed. The wedding photos were printed, the thank you notes sent, and our life settled into something sweetly mundane. Mornings with coffee in the newspaper. Evenings filled with homemade dinners and laughter echoing through hallways. Julian kissed me before every surgery and called afterward just to say he loved me. There were no secrets. No silence. No vanishing acts. Just peace. And then one afternoon I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer. But the voicemail came 30 seconds later. "Claire, it's Daniel from Monroe Industries. You may want to hear this." The message was clipped, careful, but the meaning behind it was anything but subtle. Lila had been arrested. Fraud. Embezzlement. Intellectual property theft. She'd been siphoning funds from a joint fashion venture she'd launched upon her return, ironically funded by Monroe's largest investor at the time. Apparently the investor was someone Ethan had brought in. A decision that, according to Daniel, wrecked half the company's credibility. And now everything was crumbling. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in one hand, newspaper in the other as the headlines broke. Monroe Industries faces backlash after financial scandal. Fashion darling Lila Reynolds in custody. There she was again on the front page. But this time not draped in elegance or mystery. This time she looked like a woman who had gambled everything, and lost. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in her downfall. Just quiet vindication. The truth has a funny way of showing up eventually, whether you ask for it or not. Julian came home that evening and found me staring out the window. "You heard?" he asked, setting his bag down. I nodded. "She's in custody. Ethan's company is tanking." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You okay?" I thought about it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just done. "Yeah," I said softly. "I really am." A part of me hoped Ethan would reach out. That he'd say something, anything, to acknowledge the mess he'd chosen over the life we'd once shared. But he didn't. Not directly. Instead, a letter arrived a week later. No return address. Just my name written in a familiar hand. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy in my hands, sealed with a wax stamp I instantly recognized. Ethan had always favored old-fashioned things. Letter writing, first editions, cufflinks. He once said that real words on real paper made apologies mean more. Too bad he'd never sent one when it mattered. I stared at it for a long while. Considered throwing it away without reading. But curiosity, one last thread that hadn't yet snapped, pulled me in. I sat at the kitchen table alone and opened it. His handwriting hadn't changed. Still neat, careful, deliberate. Like everything he did. "Claire, I imagine this is the last thing you want from me. I debated writing this at all. But there are things I need to say, regardless of whether you ever reply. You were never second best. I told myself that lie and I let you believe it too. But the truth is I chose a memory over a future. I let the past seduce me, convince me that love only counts when it's painful or dramatic or epic. But you were the quiet, steady kind. The kind I didn't know how to deserve. So I turned away. And when I finally looked back, you were already gone. And somehow I think that's what finally taught me what love is. I won't ask you for anything. I don't deserve another chance or your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that losing you was the beginning of my own unraveling. I hope you never look over your shoulder again. I hope he looks at you the way I never did. I hope he knows exactly what he has. Goodbye, Claire." Ethan. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. No tears came. No anger. Just a quiet acceptance. Because closure doesn't always come in the moment you leave. Sometimes it shows up in a letter after everything is already healed. That night, Julian found me sitting on the porch with the unopened bottle of wine we'd been saving since the wedding. He sat beside me, not asking anything. I handed him the envelope. "Are you okay?" he asked after reading it. "I am now," I said. Because finally Ethan had said the words I'd waited years to hear. And they no longer mattered. Time, I've learned, doesn't heal everything. But it teaches you how to live with what's left. In the months that followed the letter, the world around me felt different. Not brighter, not simpler, but real. No more waiting for someone to choose me. No more wondering what I lacked. Julian and I traveled for our honeymoon. Just the two of us, no photographers, no status updates. We danced barefoot on a balcony in Santorini. We shared soup in a tucked-away bistro in Prague. We walked across ancient stone bridges and laughed until our cheeks ached. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When we came home, life returned to its rhythm. Julian went back to the hospital. I opened a small creative agency with a friend. I helped brides design invitation suites and styled shoots for people celebrating the kinds of love that don't need to be shouted to be real. Sometimes I told them pieces of my story. Sometimes I didn't. Because some stories don't need retelling once they've ended. One chilly autumn afternoon, I was walking home from work when I passed a bookstore downtown. In the display window was a memoir. One of those tell-all exposés written by a former executive at Monroe Industries. The cover read, "Behind the Empire, the Rise and Fall of Lila Reynolds." I didn't go inside. I didn't need to read it. I had lived it. And more importantly, I had left it. That night, I watched Julian help a neighbor's kid fix a bike chain. His sleeves rolled up, smudges of grease on his hands. He looked up, caught my eye, and smiled like I was the only thing he saw. That was love. Not the kind that hides. Not the kind that apologizes too late. But the kind that shows up. Over and over again. We made pasta together that evening. I burned the garlic. He ruined the sauce. We laughed anyway. And after dinner, as we sat on the couch wrapped in a shared blanket, I realized something I never thought I'd feel again. I was free. Not from Ethan, but from the version of myself that loved him. The one who accepted crumbs and mistook them for love. She was gone. And in her place was someone stronger. Someone softer. Someone whole. The end.